So this session is called Getting Things Done for Programmers. My name is Kito, and just a few words about me. I am the principal consultant of Virtua, where we do training, consulting, mentoring, architecture, etc., for a variety of technologies, including web components on the front end, Angular on the front end, React, also some mobile stuff, Jakarta EE, microservices, Java, all that kind of fun stuff. If you like podcasts, I encourage you to check out the Stacked Podcast at stackedpodcast.com. And there it's me and a couple other, three other co-hosts. And every month or so, the four of us get together and we talk about a variety of technologies, a lot of stuff that's happening in the Java space, just software engineering in general. We usually have a guest. Often we have other Java champions and other popular people in the community drop by. So if you like podcasts, check that out. Also, you can find it on iTunes, or I guess Apple Podcasts is what they call it now, or Spotify as well. I'm a member of the Jakarta EE Ambassadors Leadership Council, and used to be, well, I guess I still am a Java Community Process member, but I was involved with a lot of the Java EE specifications back in the day. I'm a Google developer expert in web technologies, and I speak at lots of conferences. So that's pretty much me. Before I begin, I wanted to get a handle from the audience, like how many of you use like a productivity methodology besides, like, you know, whatever your team at your job do, whether it's getting things done or something else. If you do, can you just put it in the chat? Or even if you don't, just put it in the chat. Just want to get a handle. Yeah, one GTD person, full focus planner. Interesting. Okay. All right, so looks like we've got those two. All right, so I'm going to assume that the rest of you don't really use anything. All right, my cursor just locked up. Thanks. Okay. All right. Okay, so I don't know about you guys, but often I feel like this. Now I know this is a little dated because there's paper and nobody prints out anything anymore, but I think you should get the idea. Often we kind of feel pretty overwhelmed, right? And basically the deal is, you know, we've just got a lot of things going on, especially now. There's like so many inputs, and there's a lot of things competing for our attention, whether it's like, you know, friends, family, work, or all of the different services you subscribe to that are sending you notifications about everything. And part of the reason we all feel overwhelmed is that there's too many things in our heads. And the way I think of it is that any particular thing you have in your head that's like an unfinished task, or an idea that you're thinking about, or something someone asked you to do, if you're aware of it, you can think of it as an unclosed loop. And the problem is that, you know, there are a lot of unclosed loops. It could be something as simple as, you know, your boss asked you to send an email to somebody. It could be something complicated, like you need to start a new project to build a new module in a system, or something as simple as your spouse asked you to take out the trash. But all these are essentially open loops. And the problem is we all have them, and they just sort of pile up. So, you know, at the end of the day, we all sort of feel like this. It's like you have all of these different things you have to worry about and think about and do. And it can be really stressful, especially, you know, the more you have going on, the worse this can become. This is why we envy children, right? Is that they don't have as many of these things to worry about. So one of the things that I've run across over the years is something called Getting Things Done. Now, I'm not affiliated with this guy, David Allen, or anything. I just am into his methodology. He wrote this book a long time ago. There's a fairly recent update out there. But I ran across it when I was having trouble it's probably been like at least 15 years by now. maybe around there, but essentially, I was working from home. I was self-employed doing consulting, training and stuff. But my wife was sick, and she had lots of health issues. And I realized that going to our independent doctors wasn't really going to help us manage it. Like, we needed someone to actually pay attention to all the different doctors and what they were saying and what they were doing. And we need basically a healthcare advocate is their role that they call it. But and I really felt overwhelmed. Like, I didn't know how to manage all the things that are going on in my personal life and also my work life. And I ran across GTD, and it helped me sort of organize things and get things into a way that I could actually manage both work, both professionally and personally. I still do it all the time. I'm never perfect. Things are never, the best that I want them to be, but they're quite, there's a way, a process that I can use to help me get on track when I get off track. And that's what this is for. So it's a pretty simple process. It takes some discipline to keep it up, but it's pretty simple. The idea is that you do a few different things. You capture, so anything that you need to worry about or do, you can capture, which means write down somewhere. We'll talk about different ways to capture things. But basically, you capture something. You clarify, which means you sort of figure out what it is. Like, so your boss said to write an email. What email is that, and who's to go to, and what work do you need to do in order to write that email? Or your spouse asks you to do something to fix something. It's like, well, what I have to do? Do I have to read a manual first? Do I need to take it apart first? Like, what is it I need to do? So clarifies where you figure out what it actually is. Then you can organize it. Which means you can give it to someone else, you can put it on a calendar, you can do something with it. And you also need to review stuff occasionally. So this is actually the hardest part. I'm gonna talk more about this, but it doesn't really help to write stuff down and keep track of things if you don't actually look at it regularly. And that's what reviewing is about. And then you can also engage, right? And that's just doing it. But the idea is that once you've done these other steps, the engage part is actually a lot easier, because you're not spending a lot of time wondering if it's the right thing you're supposed to be doing or how to do it. You're just doing it. So basically, the idea is that you separate the work of figuring out what to do and when to do and how to do it, you separate that from the actual operation doing the thing, which is very liberating. So this is a reference card, just to give you an idea. And I think you'll appreciate some of the old images in this presentation. I've had this one for a while. But the idea is that there's stuff, right? There's projects, commitments, communications, meetings, financials, client stuff, whatever. There's stuff. And it needs to go into an inbox. And that inbox can be, we'll talk about different inboxes, but it doesn't have to be like a physical inbox like it's shown here. Could be something else. But basically, when something's in there, you have to clarify what it is. You have to go through it and then figure out what to do about it. Is it something you can actually do right now? Can you do it in just a couple minutes? Just go ahead and do it. If it's not something you can do right now, then what can you do with it? You can just get rid of it. If it's not important, you just get rid of it right away. You can, defer it. You can file it somewhere. And if it's doable and it's not something that you can do quickly, then you need to put it on in some place where you know it is. So this is what we usually call a project list, but we can talk more about that. Or you could delegate to somebody else, right? You could say, hey, so-and-so, this is what you need to do, and then it's their problem. But you may need to make sure that you follow up on it. So you may not completely get off your plate. It depends on your perspective and what you're trying to do. But that's basically it. It's like you go through the stuff that's in your inbox, you decide what to do about it, and then you do it. And this applies to pretty much any kind of work, whether it's work you do for your job, or whether it's work you do at home or anything else. So the big part of this thing is collect everything. Well, not big, but one of the big things. And you notice here that my open loops are now been closed. So they actually have a place to go, right? And you see they're connecting different parts here. So you have to really collect things, and I don't mean be a pack rat. I mean that you need to pay attention to what you're committing to. So if your job is to do something, you need to keep track of what that is, and put it somewhere so you can refer to it. And this goes for work. Often this involves keeping track of not only obvious things like, you have a JIRA task assigned to yourself, or someone sent you an email and asked you to do something. But it could be things which are part of your job, but no one really talks about, or things that you're doing that you don't really mention that much. Maybe you're spending like an hour a day, coaching the team, but no one really realizes how much time that's taking. That counts as a responsibility that's on your mind. It's a commitment. So basically you collect everything, and this includes, like, if someone says, or if you tell someone you're going to do something, you need to collect it as well. Because otherwise you might forget you said it, and then they'll be like, hey, you said you're going to do X, Y, Z. So you have to collect stuff. And you can collect stuff in different ways. You can write it down in a notebook. You can put it in an app. This is an old version of Evernote. You can put it on sticky notes. You can use a mind map to capture stuff. But the idea is that you collect it. And this really is hard sometimes, because there's a lot of things we do or think about that we don't actually write down, right? And now I write down really stupid things like, bring I don't know, bring the tissue box downstairs, or like kind of boring stuff like that. Or obviously send an email to somebody, things like that. But I do that because it helps me remember it. And honestly, just sometimes the act of writing something down really makes a big difference in terms of you actually remembering that it exists. The other thing that writing it down does, or collecting it, is it gets it off of your sort of amorphous world into some tangible location. Okay. If you told someone you do something, if you write it down, it's like now something you can decide how to do it, or if you're really going to do it. Whereas if it's just some amorphous open loop in your head, it's going to drag your energy. It's going to pull energy from you. All right, so when you collect stuff, you can put it in an inbox. So obviously you can have a paper inbox where you put crap, and you're probably not going to have that much stuff to put in there at this point in time. But I still have one, and I put in mail in there. I put in anything that I just need to process that's physical, whether it's a cable I need to put away, or something that the kids gave me, or something. I put physical stuff in there too, and mail, of course. Inbox, your email inbox is another one, and this would be a bad situation if you have this many emails in your inbox, but I know some people have a lot. There's a mail thing. Obviously that's an old image, but voicemail is another thing, another inbox. And you can have different inboxes around your house. Like, so I have one in my office, but then I work in the basement. I work from home, and I have another shelf that goes to the basement, where I put crap that I need to deal with. So anytime anyone in the family has something they want me to deal with, they put it on that shelf. So that's sort of like my home shelf in some ways. And people that work at an office, they can have an inbox in their office, a physical in the office, and then they may have one at home that's completely different. So it just depends on sort of what your situation is. But basically, anytime you get an input, you can put it in some system. And this could be, let me go back to this. This could even be just, I like to go for backgrounds. And also walks, just to break up the day. And I usually will have some random thought, and I'll put it in my task manager, which has an inbox, just as something I need to think about later. So that's an idea. Or you could write it down in your notes app or Evernote or something, just as a thought you need to process. Okay. Oh, sorry about that. I just lost a connection here. 1 second. Okay. All right. Okay, so once you've captured stuff, you then have to process it. And the term they use now is clarify. But I like process because it's more of a programmer perception. But regardless, you've got stuff you need to deal with. And I like this idea of a factory because like things are constantly coming in. So you always have lots of inputs, right? And then you need to figure out what they are. Like, are there things that you can just ignore? Are there things that you need to clarify about what they are? Or do they need to be delegated, et cetera, et cetera. So you got to process them. And this you can do, as they come in, or you can batch processing, which helps a lot. But the idea is that any inbox, you're going to try and process as much as you can, or as regularly as you can, I should say, so that it gets to zero. Because anything that's not in your inbox that hasn't been processed is something that is essentially an open loop. It's something that you haven't dealt with. And I have this happens to me sometimes. Something gets stuck in my inbox and I just won't get to it for a while. And then, the deadline for it is passed or something. So you have to make sure if you do this, you have to actually make sure you process the inbox. So the process of clarifying is really pretty simple. Do it if it takes just a couple minutes or less. And this is one of the best, most useful things about GTD is because you can apply this to pretty much anything, even if you're not processing stuff. If you're walking around and you think of something to do, just do it. If it only takes like a minute, just get it over with. If it's going to take you a long time, put it in an inbox, write it down somewhere, and then you can process it later. Defer it, which is always fun. That means delegate it to somebody else. I'm sorry, that's the next one. Defer it just means you decide to do it later. And this can be very empowering too, because just deciding that you're going to handle something later means that you're not worrying about it anymore. So, if you need to make a phone call or start working on a new project, or any story, any task, if you decide to defer it, you don't have to worry about it until you decide to take it up again. Now, when that happens could be, depends on the project. But I think we've all had projects, either personal or professional, where it gets deferred and no one ever comes back to it. And that's fine because it wasn't a priority, right? So that's always a possibility as well. You can delegate it. This is what I was talking about before. You can get someone else to do it for you. And what's useful to do if you do delegate it is actually still kind of keep a task just to follow up, like, because sometimes, I know most people who have any sort of managerial responsibility are really good at following up. I'm not. Like, I'm not a manager, but I am in a role sometimes where I have to manage people, at least on some level. And I am very good about being hands off and just assuming they'll do it. And it doesn't always work. So it helps to have, a stakeholder, a place to say, hey, I'm waiting on information from so-and-so. Of course, you can delete it, right? So, if it's a bad orange, just throw it away. But the good thing about doing this is that it kind of forces you to deal with things and decide what needs to be done about them, because part of what creates the stress that we have with the open loops is not knowing what it is or what to do about it. Okay, once you decide what to do about it, a lot of the stress goes away. All right, so I said before, the goal is inbox 0. I'm not going to tell you that I always get to inbox 0, and I haven't been there in probably at least a month, but I'm always striving for it. And when I get there, I'm very excited. And I actually do not usually leave items in my inboxes as to-dos. Like if I have a to-do, I usually move it to my task manager. Usually there are things that I've read and not dealt with, or I need to file it. I have a complicated filing system, or I need to follow up on it. So yeah, so go for inbox 0. And I remember that could be a physical inbox as well. So if you've got if you have a physical inbox, you want to try and get that to 0 as well. So when you decide that you need something is actionable, you can consider it a task, right? Just something you need to do, okay? And this is an old school UML diagram that basically has the idea of modeling of a task, right? So task can have a description. There may be a certain amount of time it takes. And whether it's a next action means that it's like the next thing you need to do to move something forward. Or it could just be something that needs to be done eventually, or maybe something that may not need to be done, or something that you think might need to be done in the future. And a task can have an artifact too, right? So a lot of my tasks, they have links to websites or usually just links to websites, but they may have, notes or something in Evernote or something like that. And when it comes to stories in an issue tracker, the artifacts would be, design documents, actual UI design, any sort of specification that describes what needs to be done. So there's this notion of context in GTD, and this I think works very well for developers. So we know all about context, right? Every time we write some code these days, there's some context that's passed in, and all context is it's your environment, right? So when you have work to do, when you have tasks to perform, it's important to consider the environment that you're in. And what's nice about this is that if you think about things like as, a task needs to be done in a particular context, you won't stress about not doing it when you can't do it. So, for example, one context might be your office, right? Another context might be, when you're on the go, another might be when you're using your phone or when you're hanging out at home or when you're in a, at the office in a meeting, okay? Another one might be when you're running on errands or when you're going shopping. So all these are different contexts, and you can't do some things in other contexts. So like if you're in a meeting, you're not going to be able to, call about that doctor's appointment you need to make. If you are at home on your phone, you can't really write any code, right? Now, if you have your computer, you can, right? But you're probably not going to be writing code on your phone. iPad is a different story, but code on your phone, probably not. If you're in your office, there's probably things you can't do that are home related, right? You can't do, household repairs while you're at the office. So understanding this helps because if you're at any particular context, you don't have to worry about the things you can't do. You can only figure out which things you do. And if when you collect those tasks, you keep track of what context they're in, you have a list of what's available to you in a particular context. So, when you're at home, you have tasks which are at home. When you're at work, you have tasks which are at work. When you're on errands, you have tasks that are at errands. And I'll tell you that the errands one is the most useful to me since I work at home. But, I have a list of stuff that I can do whenever I go on errands. It's very handy. Okay, so you can think of a context as something that is associated with a task, and it's pretty much the level that it's associated with, because any different task, any particular task might have one or more contexts. So in GTD, there's also this notion of a project. So a project is essentially any desired result with more than one step. And I struggle with this sometimes because there's something that's only like a couple steps and I really don't want to make it a project because it seems like too heavyweight, but it's really not. And what's nice about this model is that it helps you understand how complicated things can be. And then helps you make sure that you manage them appropriately. And the idea is that all the projects are pretty much managed the same way. So whether it's something stupid, like, or not stupid, but something simple, like, I don't know, I do podcasts, right? So, when I got a new mic, I needed to hook it up, right? So it might be, the project might be a purchase a new mic and hook it up or something. It's a generic name. So that's a pretty straightforward thing, right? Or another project might be, for one of my clients, like building the mobile front end, or the mobile app for their organization. Now, obviously, that project can be broken up into several other projects. So this is kind of a little forced of an example, but the point is that you deal with them all kind of the same way. And what's nice about this model too is that if there's something that seems pretty simple, and you make a project for it, you can basically say, okay, well, really it takes like 2 steps instead of 3. Instead of 1, or it takes 3 steps instead of 1. And often you'll find that's the case. So, for example, this is sort of an interesting example, but My daughter has type 1 diabetes, and we use devices to manage her blood sugar. Long story, but so there was an exploit with Safari on iOS, and for kids, you kind of want them to have the latest version with the security patches because they're the ones that are likely to go to some sketchy site with Safari and have it crash their phone, right? So, it would seem pretty simple. The task is just upgrading iOS on her phone, right? But it wasn't, because I needed to look to make sure that the latest version of iOS wasn't going to mess up all of her specialized apps for her healthcare. So then it became a multi-step process. So that's why if something is anything more complicated than one step, it's very handy to just, make a project out of it. And what's cool about this is that some projects are done very quickly, whereas of course others are not. So. And really all the project is saying is that, it has more than one step. You need to define the outcome, which is what you need to actually happen, right? So, so the outcome for my mic example might be my mic is on my desk with the boom mic stand plugged into my computer and configured with my computer so I can easily use it. That might be an outcome. But if you don't define the outcome, it's really hard to kind of figure out what to do next, right? Like, what are you actually working towards? So another example is we are working on, I have an internal project and we're working on like a MVP release, right? So that's a project. And there's a lot of next actions in Jira, right? That the team is working on, but there's also next actions for me, and often it's something boring like review PRs or something, just to remind myself I need to do it. So that's another example. But the idea is that a project is not something you have to spend a lot of time on. It's basically you say, this is an outcome I'm trying to achieve. This is the next thing I need to worry about to achieve that outcome. It's pretty much it. You can spend more time if you want to. But in terms of getting it off your chest and getting it moving, just figure out the next thing you have to worry about. It makes it a lot easier. All right, so a project has a task. A task can have artifacts. Projects can have artifacts too. A particular project might have, different resources that are related to it, whether it's manuals, whether it's websites, whether it's wiki pages, who knows. There can be stuff associated with it as well. All right, so that's a project. So you also need to organize what you're doing. Okay, so we talked about you can collect, clarify, and then organize, right? And organize means you put the tasks, the things that you process somewhere. Okay, so you could put them in a task manager. I use this tool called Nozbe, Nozbe. I've been using it probably over a decade. It's not the most popular task management app, but it's really good for getting things done. And it runs on every platform. So I use that for keeping track of things, and I keep track of lists. I have lots of lists in there. I have a list of all the projects that I have. Each project has a next action or multiple, but there's also some other lists you can keep, like, which things you're waiting for. And this is helpful when you delegate something, right? When you can say, you can just keep a list that has the things that you're waiting for other people for. In Nozbe, it's modeled as a context. So any particular tasks you have, you can just say you're waiting for. But that makes it handy. And what I do with that list is I review it occasionally. And I look and say, okay, I'm waiting on so-and-so from, waiting on an email response from this person, or I'm waiting for, this to happen before I can do this or something. So it's a helpful reminder. Another place to put your stuff is on the calendar, of course. So if you have stuff that has to be done on a certain day, you can put it on the calendar. The caveat is just try not to put things on the calendar which don't have to be done on that day. And I think we all struggle with this. There's stuff we want to have done on a certain day, but it doesn't have to be done, and then it ends up being late, but it's not really due. So why is it considered late? So keep that in mind, though. If something's important, you can just put it on your calendar. Okay, so you can also organize things, right? So I'm sorry, you can organize things in folders. If you read the Getting Things Done book, they'll talk about paper folders a lot. A lot of people don't do this. I don't really organize stuff in folders that much. There's a few folders I have, like So have some folders for some corporate stuff and for taxes and things like that. But if you like paper, you can create a folder for projects you're working on and put stuff in there. And you can also put stuff in a note manager, like Evernote or the Notes app on your phone, or this is an old picture of OneNote. But these are great places to put stuff that you need to capture and keep around, especially reference material. And this is something that I do. This is an old picture, which is why you see things like JSF in here and portals. But what I use project identifiers. So anytime I have a project, I give it a name with a specific naming convention. And then I use that convention across different systems. So I use this in my task manager, Nosby. I use it in Gmail for labels. I use it on the file system for any files that I'm keeping track of. And that way, like, it's just easy for me to know where stuff is if I want to find something that's related to a project. Basically, you can end up with a situation like this. So on the left here is the file system. This is my email. I use a plugin called Active Inbox. And I think over here, I think this is Evernote. So all of them have the same identifiers that I use. That way I can keep track of everything across all the systems I use. Now, the only caveat with my naming convention is that a lot of tools don't deal well with wrapping things without spaces. So you may want to try a different naming convention if you do this, but the idea is the same. So then there's this idea of reviewing. And the reason the review process is there is because it's kind of hard to do much with all the things you collect and organize and clarify if you never look at them regularly. So, I mean, I look at my lists every day, but I don't look at all of them every day. I only look at, like, the stuff that's due that day and the list for any projects I'm working on, right? But the review process is basically, it says, every week, try and review all of your next actions. Well, I'm sorry, this is every day, which is pretty much what I said. I review the next actions every day. But the weekly review is what I'm talking about. So this is where you actually go through and do a deep dive. And this is probably the hardest part of this methodology, is that you need to actually spend time every week, doing some grooming, essentially. It's a pain because it's hard to set aside the time, but it's very rewarding if you do it. So basically what you do during the weekly review is you clear out inboxes, review all of your projects in the next action. You can also perform a mind sweep, which is a helpful way to get what's on your mind. So basically all it is you sit around, you don't sit around, but you can sit or stand, whatever you want to do. And you just write down the stuff that's on your mind, and you can focus on different areas, like, different aspects of work, different aspects of personal life, financial stuff, business stuff, technical stuff, whatever it is that's grabbing your attention. And what I find that helps with is I actually, after I do the mind sweep, I don't do it every week, but when I do it, I actually go through it after I've written it down, and then I pull out tasks in areas I want to look at. So I may have written down a project that I was wondering, like, what happened to it, or why I haven't done it, or if it's done or something. Then during my weekly review, I go back and look at that project, or I may need to create a new project, or I may need to call somebody. I'll write that down as a task. But what's nice about that is it helps me focus on the things which are grabbing my attention. And at the end of the day, that's the important thing. It's like, you don't want to be stressed out about the stuff you have to do. So GTD is all about making you less stressed about the stuff you have to do, and give you some tools to help manage it. It doesn't mean you'll be doing the right things. It just means that you have a way to do the things that you're trying to do. So you also, during the weekly review, look at your calendar. And this is really helpful to look. You're supposed to look at the next week, next few weeks, but also the previous week or two. Just to see what you've done, and if there's anything else you need to keep track of, like, maybe there's a meeting and you forgot to send out the meeting notes or something like that. The next weeks, of course, are very helpful, because it's good to know what's coming up. Like, do you have a business trip coming up in 2 weeks you haven't planned for? Or do you have a big meeting coming up, next week and you need to set aside time for it? Or for me, is JCON closer than you thought it was? Do you need to block off some time to work on it? So reviewing the calendar is very helpful. Usually what happens during my weekly reviews, which, like everything else, there have been times where I do it all the time and times where I fall off. I usually, create new projects and check off a whole bunch of crap that I did that I didn't actually check off yet. And then sometimes I think about, what would I like to do? What are the things I need to do? Are there things that that I should be doing that I'm not? So it also helps you prioritize, because often what will happen is you'll realize, oh my goodness, I overcommitted. I said I would do all these things and I cannot do them all. And then you can figure out how to get out of them. So if there is something that you care about, if it's a commitment you made to yourself, you can usually just say, okay, I'm not going to do it right now. So for example, I bought a 3D printer, it broke, I got a part for it, it's still sitting here broken. And I've decided, that's okay. I'll get to it when I have the time to work on it. But if you have commitments with coworkers or management, that may be more difficult to get out of, but it also gives you the opportunity to say to someone, hey, I've got all these things on my plate. Can you help me prioritize what I need to do? Because I can't do all of them, including the thing you're asking me to do. But it's hard to do that if you don't know all the things you've committed to. So that's the story with the weekly review. And then there's Engage, and Engage is the Runway. It's just where you do stuff, where you actually work. And this is where you can spend time, working on your tasks. And what's nice is that when you're on the Runway, you can basically sit down and look at your list of stuff to do, given the context that you're in. So, as an example for me, most of the time I have a computer and internet access, right? But sometimes I am in a different location and maybe the internet access isn't as good, so I focus on different things. And sometimes I'm in a situation where I have my phone, I don't have my computer. Well, what can I do on my phone? So that's when I can just do stuff because I have a list of everything I need to do. And that's what the Runway is all about. The Runway is also where you can handle deep work, right? So if you have blocks at a time, if you have a block of time set aside to work on something, you can just look at your list and say, okay, given the situation I'm in, I can work on these tasks. So when it comes to selecting those tasks, we talked about, context, right? But also time available is important. So let's say your window is only an hour, well, maybe starting that new story is probably not a good idea because you need to check out the repo and then figure out how to build it and then learn, read up about what the story is, what you should do. Maybe that's not a good thing, but you do have a stack of emails you need to process or clarify. Why don't you just go ahead and do that? Because you can get a lot more bang for the buck out of it. Or maybe, maybe there is something technical you can do. Like, so for example, code review is a good thing. That doesn't take that long depending on the code review. But you want to work on things that you can do given the time available. Also your energy level. And this is something I think we often forget about, but if you're exhausted, don't waste time trying to write code. It's just not, it's a waste of time. Either take a nap if you can, or take a break, go for a walk, go for a bike ride, or do something else that you can do at your energy level. And that's, email is always a good thing to do with a low energy level. There are other things too. But you can look at your list and say, okay, well, this is something that doesn't take that long and doesn't require much energy, so I'm just going to do this right now. But you're still getting something done, right? Now, priority is another thing, and priority is sort of a tricky thing with GTD. GTD is sort of anti-priority, but we all like to have priorities on things. So this is sort of an intuitive thing. In different to-do systems or different task managers, usually there is a priority feature. So you can always use that if you're using a task manager, but often you just kind of know which things are important. So, if you have a time block, like for example, I knew yesterday I blocked off the entire day to work on my JCON sessions because I had 3 today. But, last week, I had, I didn't have to work only on JCON sessions, but if I had like a window where I wasn't really sure what to do, I worked on my JCON sessions because that was the most important thing. Same thing goes if, you have an angry client, then that's going to be your priority in terms of the task that you can do. So you can think of priorities that way, but you don't necessarily have to have like, ABC priority or 1, 2, 3 priority or anything like that. So, so that's how to decide what tasks to manage. There's also what we call focus, and a focus is just, oh, I'm sorry, I'm thinking about something different, which is an area of focus. So when it comes to focusing on your tasks, this is another key thing. So I think a lot of us are sort of ADD-ish, especially programmers. And even if you're not, this world is very prone to interruption. So whether it's text messages you're getting, Slack messages, Discord messages, emails, phone calls, there's a lot of stuff going on. So so it's important to, when you're doing actually deep work, to eliminate interruptions and distractions. And that means actually using the do not disturb, making your coworkers aware that you're not checking Slack every 5 minutes. I try and use the Pomodoro technique, so that I focus on things for at least 25 minutes, and then I look and see if anyone contacted me and needs some input immediately. But try and focus on what you're doing and try and do one thing at a time. Don't try to do 10 different things. Do one thing at a time. You can get it done quickly. If it's not something that you can do, then maybe it needs to be broken into a smaller task that you can just do. Talk about avoiding distractions, boxing your time. And also what I do is, I tell people I'm not available during certain times because otherwise I won't get anything done. So you need to be protective of your time if your job is to do actual, deep work. If your job is to talk to people and manage what they're doing, that's a different story. Okay. So there are a whole bunch of task management tools. You can use a paper planner. You can use text files if you want. There are different sort of open source systems out there that I've heard people talk about. Like I said, I use Noseby, and looks like this. Active Inbox is a tool I use as well. And what it does is it lets you turn emails into tasks, and it also lets you like quickly iterate through tasks. You can schedule tasks for later, schedule emails for later and stuff like that. So it kind of enhances my my Gmail flow, and I use Gmail for pretty much everything that's related to my company and my personal stuff. Obviously, if my client has something else, I can't use Active Inbox. But I still use this methodology for client emails. I still process everything, and it's much easier for me to keep those inboxes clean usually. That's Noseby. But there's tons of stuff out there. Remember the Milk is an old one, which used to be cool. Things is popular. OmniFocus is popular on the Mac. Microsoft has To-Do, which used to be a Wunderlist. Todoist is another popular one. Outlook, there's Gmail tasks. Evernote has tasks. Reminders on iOS. There's a million ways to handle tasks. So if you want to start doing something like this, you can just pick one and go from there. The Getting Things Done website from Glenn Allen, the founder, has David Allen, excuse me. Glenn Allen is where I live. David Allen. They have guides for some systems too. So they'll have like, a GTD guide for Evernote or a GTD guide for Outlook or something like that. All right, so those are list management tools for capturing stuff. This is stuff that you have to process later, but you're just kind of capturing it. And you can use a notebook, and then you can also use task managers. I put a lot of stuff in Noseby as stuff in the Noseby inbox that I need to process later, but I also will put stuff in Evernote, and you can use anything else that you want. You can also use mind mapping software. I use this when I'm trying to work out something. There's a whole bunch of different mind mapping tools out there. If you saw my presentations earlier today, I use MindMeister, and I use that for presentations now. I used to just use it for brainstorming presentations, and then I realized I could just do the whole presentation in it, which is pretty handy. But there's lots of different tools for managing that. And mind maps are great if you sort of like planning out a project, whether it's a real like work project or just a set of things you need to do. So there's a few different ones: Mind Manager, Mind Node, Mind for Two, MindMeister, whatever. All right, so that's sort of your overview of GTD. When it comes to programming, for programmers, I should say, there's a few different things, a few different ways you can look at this. And you find that if you work in an agile methodology, you sort of are doing some of these things already. The important thing is just to carry it further into your daily workflow. So an issue tracker is pretty much like a list manager. I actually, if something is in the issue tracker for the project, I don't put it in Noseby as well. That would be kind of duplicating things, right? So it's another issue tracker. I mean, it's another task list manager. And you can think of your inbox as new issues which are assigned to you. They're not always in a quote unquote inbox, but they're things you should probably look at and process and decide how you need to manage it. A single story or bug can be broken up into multiple tasks. And that, the way you manage that is totally depends on your workflow. Maybe it's to-dos in code. Maybe it's in your task manager. Maybe you put subtasks in your issue tracker. Who knows? But usually a story and even bug fix usually requires multiple steps. Maybe the first step is to reproduce it. So if you break it down into, the first step is reproduce it, you can do that in a certain defined amount of time, right? And the next step would be to, fix it. Or, maybe once you reproduce it, you'll know what the next step is. You probably won't know until you reproduce it. So you can break stories and bugs down into multiple tasks. And honestly, they're projects. I don't always put them in my task manager as projects, but essentially they are. They usually require one or more or two or more steps to complete. And to-do tags and code are tasks. I'm anti to-do when it comes to checking it into version control, because I've seen to-dos that are like 15 years old. It does not need to be in the source code. But I think they're great for while you're working on a PR. Put your to-dos in there and then make sure they're gone before you check them in. All right, so in Teams, you could institute the inbox concept, which means, say that these are things that you need to process and figure out what to do. You can share tasks in projects. It depends on whatever tools you're using, but this is something you can do. And you can also delegate tasks, of course. Now, in Scrum or an Agile environment, you can think of the task list for a project as the backlog, essentially. You can think of capturing is the process of creating new stories. Clarifying is really grooming. Organizing is pretty much like release planning. And the reviewing is pretty much like the sprint retrospective, right? Where you go back and look at the previous thing and figure out what else you need to change. And engage is just working on stories. So this stuff maps pretty well to Agile methodologies. So the bigger picture is that we all want some sort of work-life balance. And the way I look at it is, we're only alive so long, and your attention is valuable and your time is valuable, either to you personally or maybe valuable money-wise, or both, hopefully. So you want to make sure you maximize it. You don't want to waste time on things which are not important. You don't want to stress about things which are not important. And for the things that are important, you want to make sure you have some way of handling them, or at least know that you decided to do it later. So remember, Runway are tasks. There's also this idea of projects at the 10,000 feet. So there's this concept of levels with GTD. Then there's this area I haven't talked about too much, but it's called areas of focus. And that's where you kind of keep track of the things that you have to worry about. For my company, it's my company. So I have a lot of areas of focus, right? And some of them are like, bookkeeping and human resources and stuff like that. But mostly my areas of focus are, the projects we're working on and the clients we have. And boring stuff like the website. But obviously that's going to depend on your role, and you also have personal roles of focus, personal areas of focus. So one of my areas of focus in my personal life is the pets. I'm the guy that handles all the pet stuff. I also take out the trash. Those aren't, the trash is not really an area of focus, but the pets really are, because there's a lot of things involved. Also, you can think about goals, 1 and 2 year goals. You can think of a 3 to 5 year vision. This works for companies, for your job, for your life. And then the life, of course, is 50,000 feet. So what happens is if you think about these things regularly, they all sort of organize, right? So, if you know what you want to do in 3 to 5 years and you find out all the stuff you're doing right now is not really useful for doing that, then that might help you change what you want to do. I'm not saying that I'm very good at doing all these different levels, but this is the methodology supports all these different levels. So certainly if you start this, you start with a runway because it's easy to do. Then you can kind of go up to see what, how much you want to get into it. But certainly something to think about. Okay, so there's no magic bullet. There is a device called Magic Bullet, but there's no actual magic bullet. So this is not going to fix all your problems, but it does give you tools for managing things. And remember, take all that stuff, throw it in an inbox, figure out what to do with it. Do it if you can really quickly, defer it if you need to, delegate it to somebody else, or figure out what the next thing is to do. And then you'll be on the road to getting things done. All right. So you want to close loops, collect, process, organize, review. So that's basically the process. All right. And that's it. So davidco.com is the site for the book. There's also another book called Making Things Work, which is pretty good too. They're sort of different aspects. And there's a couple links for you. And I didn't add it, but Todoist has a good GTD breakdown as well. So that's pretty much it.